Congratulations, you made it through week 4, learning everything about free money. In this module, we covered the non-recoupable finance sources, which include not just production incentives, but also brand integration, crowdfunding, music investments, in-kind services, and deferments. And the module describes the importance of those non-refundable financing sources in relation to the optimal balance that we have to create in our finance plan for a film or TV project to be feasible and to be profitable. Non-recoupable finance sources and their risk-reducing characteristics are shown to reduce risk, in fact, and optimize profits. Here are some of the things we talked about this week. We talked about the importance of non-recoupable finance sources. We talked about U.S. production incentives and how they are to be treated when it comes to getting a loan in advance. We talked about international production incentives and what you need to do in order to get those. We talked about optimizing the production incentives. What are some things you can do to optimize the incentives in the region that you're shooting in? We covered crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, and we covered music investments, which are focused on recouping from music royalties. We talked about brand integration and how to optimally apply that when working with brands. We talked about in-kind services and deferments and how to treat those. By the end of the week, you should now be able to differentiate between the various non-recoupable finance sources. You will understand the terms and conditions related to them. You know how to include them in your finance plan to create an optimal balance, and you identify the risk minimization effects that these non-recoupable finance sources will have on your finance plan and on your project. Let's take a look at production incentives. Production incentives are often used to support the local economy and to help with employment locally in the film and entertainment industry. Let's talk about U.S. incentives first. State subsidies are designed to encourage production companies to produce film and television projects in the state and to help create and maintain film industry jobs, also to promote tourism and the state's image, and they have a positive impact on the state's economy. Production incentives offer a tax credit or a tax rebate to producers who produce a film or television project in that incentive state. And each state regulates which budget expenses are actually eligible to receive a credit or a rebate. And it varies very much between the states in the US, and you really have to look closely what kind of expenses from your budgeted line items are actually eligible to receive a credit or a rebate. In most states, it's not the entire budget that is eligible, it's certain expenses. Often it is just the below-the-line budget items, and in some states, below the line and some of the above-the-line expenses are eligible. It very much varies depending on the states you are visiting. Producers can claim the incentive after the film project is finished, or they can use tax incentive lenders to advance the incentives and then use these funds and this loan to cover a portion of the production costs. They can also use a bank to cash flow the incentives. The difference between the both is that if you have an incentive lender advancing the incentive to you, the incentive lender would also then be enjoying any extra overages that are applicable, for example, when you use the contingency, because the contingency is in the beginning not eligible because we don't know yet how we are going to use it and if we're going to use it through expenses created in the region when we shoot our movie there. So if we do use the incentive, the production incentive lender is usually the one to keep it. Now, when you use a bank, it's a little different because the bank basically gives you an advance as a loan as well, but that loan then becomes part of your senior loan. You would still have to go through all the paperwork and registering with the state and making sure the state actually pays you, and then you use that money to pay back the bank. The risk here is a little higher for you as a producer in case anything changes in the legislation of the state you're shooting in. To avoid the risk of changing legislation by advancing the incentive through a lender, you can avoid the risk of potentially not being able to pay your loan back if you got the incentive cash flowed through a bank. The incentive does reduce the equity investor's risk by reducing the equity portion that is to be allocated in your finance plan. Let's take a look at international production incentives and what they entail. In addition to US incentives, you also have the option to shoot outside of the US and take advantage of the many international incentives. There are a lot of them, especially in Europe. Foreign tax regions and incentive regions in Europe offer up to 50% of the eligible production expenses as an incentive to be paid to producers that shoot there. US producers can tap into this source by contacting hundreds of European film funds that are open to investing in film and television which meet their criteria. In order to receive European co-production funding as a US producer, you must fulfill certain criteria. Some of them include the following. In addition to a tax credit that is similar to a tax credit you would get in the US based on what you're spending, you would, for example, get that tax credit also in a country like Germany. But in addition, Germany would offer a grant that's a locally incentivizing grant which has to do with local elements, for example, a local coloring of the story. So let's say you have a movie that you're shooting in Germany and it's about the Second World War in Germany. That would reflect a local coloring, and that would be subject to a grant that would be given to you because you're supporting the local culture. In addition, you are using obviously local locations, you're using local crew, local talent, writers, post-production, and anything that is being sourced from the local territory that you're shooting in. So you're trying to optimize your expenses by using all the local crews and locations that are available to you. You will also have to show a valid finance plan, which basically is a finance plan that shows the financing of 100% being covered by using these finance sources that you're putting in place. So you're giving them a finance plan that shows this is how many pre-sales I have, this is how much equity I have, this is other finance sources I have, and here is the amount I need from you, local incentive region and authority, in order to complete my 100% financing for this project. You're also going to need a deal with a local distributor. That can be a local network station or local studio. So for example, if you're going again to Germany to shoot something, you're going to have a deal with, for example, a Warner Brothers Germany or a German network like RTL Television. Most of the international subsidies do not require a lender to cash flow them. They are often being cash flowed by the incentive region in accordance with the production cash flow plan. So here you don't have to use an incentive lender like you would use for US incentives that is paid to you once you go through all the paperwork in the end after you're shooting the movie. That's why you get an incentive lender in the US, so you don't have to do that, and you can actually use the US incentive as a part to cover your production costs. Here what's happening is that the incentive lender, I should say the incentive region, not the lender, is actually cash flowing the incentive for you in accordance with the production cash flow plan that you have established. Let's take a look at crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. The basic difference between the two is one is providing you with cash, meaning money. The other one is providing you with services or support through like a group of people. For example, crowdfunding, you all know Kickstarter and GoFundMe and all of these crowdfunding pages where you can list your project and you can talk about it and you can put together a funding goal of a certain amount that you want to raise, and then you have people put in little amounts to support that funding goal, and then you might give them something in return, like a merchandising item or maybe a visit to the set and or a credit. Now for crowdsourcing, what we're doing here is you are sourcing services. For example, that could be you're going to a crowdsourcing site where you find, for example, like a UPM, a unit production manager, who is interested in elevating their career, wanting to now become a line producer, which would be the next step in their career, right? So they would say to you, listen, I'm a unit production manager for many years. I would like to now be a line producer. Would you be willing to let me be the line producer on your show? And I forego a portion of my salary for that. So that means this person is going to get a line producing credit, does the job of the line producer because you let them do it, which is, by the way, very close to the job of a unit production manager anyway. And they will then reduce their fee by half. And so you're now saving half of what you would be paying to a line producer. for example. So this would be a crowdsourcing kind of in-kind services element that you could apply. Let's talk about in-kind services and deferments and how they apply. In-kind services are production services provided that are not paid or were deferred. In that case, they become a deferment. In-kind services include post-production services, which are often offered at a much reduced rate. So what does that really mean? So when you, for example, put a movie together and you're talking to a post-production house, and post-production houses often do this early on because they want to secure a pipeline to fill their post-production houses and you know, have jobs and get films in. So they would offer you an in-kind service deal, which basically says, I'm going to give you certain things for free. I'm going to defer certain costs, in which case that becomes a deferment, which I'll talk about in a minute. So in these cases, you would get like a post-production service. Maybe they say, we'll rent you the edit suites instead of $500 a day or $1,000 a day, we'll rent them to you for $200 a day. So that would be a reduction. But if they say, for example, we are renting you the edit suites for $500 a day for 10 days, which is $5,000, but we're deferring the entire $5,000 to be paid from revenues, then that's a deferment. So a deferment is a salary, a remuneration, or a service fee, or any other budgeted payment that is being deferred, meaning out of the budget to then recoup from revenues. So what this does is it makes you have to raise less money up front, and it will move, in the case of the deferments, the payment of that remuneration, service fee, or salary into the recoupment schedule, so then it gets paid from revenues. What often happens there is that whoever deferred their payment would ask for a premium. They usually ask for like a 10% premium. Sometimes, in case you're deferring a portion of, let's say, a talent salary, they also get a profit participation. They might not necessarily get a premium, by the way, but they do get a profit participation. So when you have a talent, let's say you have Jason Statham in your movie, and Jason says, instead of my usual $5 million, I'm only going to charge you $1 million in the budget, and I'm deferring $4 million. But because I am deferring $4 million, I also want to have 20% profit participation in the film. So that's what happens often with deferments for talent salary. When you defer service fees, or if, let's say, again, to go back to our line producer example, if the line producer says, I'm deferring half of my salary, in those cases, you often have a premium applicable of a small, usually 5 to 10% payment of whatever the amount is that was deferred. If a person like the line producer says, I don't want to get paid at all, I rather want a profit participation, that would be then an in-kind service and not a deferment, because you're not really deferring any monies, you're just taking them out of the budget, and then you're making that person a profit participant, and then you give them a profit participation of, let's say, I don't know, 3 to 5% or something in that nature. Both in-kind services and deferments reduce the need for funding and help reduce risks. What are we talking about when we refer to brandtainment? There's a real difference to be made between brandtainment and product placement. Product placement basically is you allowing a certain brand to be shown on screen in your movie, for example, right? So it's just a placement of a brand on screen. Brandtainment or product integration is more than that. You're now using the product organically. It's being used in connection with the character. It's been used in context with the story, and it's being used in context with a message that comes through the character and through the story. So it's really involved in a content context in a way this product is being used in an organic fashion. Brands are eager to expand their reach and attract eyeballs and sales. Working with brands has an advantage for both the brand and the producer if the following items occur. So the producer must have secured a US distribution deal and communicate a release or an air date with the brand. So the brand knows, okay, this movie is going to be on TV, it's going to be seen on HBO, or this movie is going to be released through a studio theatrically, or maybe there is a release campaign that the producer worked on and they put themselves together, but there is a certain release happening here. So they just want to make sure that whatever movie they're getting to work with and getting included in is not just going to end up on the shelf and never be seen by anyone. The show concept needs to meet the brand's requirement in terms of the overall message and product integration in the story. This is what I mentioned earlier by saying the brand really wants to know that the message of the movie kind of aligns with the message of the brand, and that the way the product is shown aligns with the message of the brand, and it is shown in an organic way, not just shoved into the screen for 5 seconds. The producer must understand that the organic and authentic integration of a product is the goal, not the product placement, which is exactly what I meant earlier. The producer really needs to work with the advertising agency and the brand to make sure that how the product is shown in the scene is in alignment with what the brand wants. The producer should be open in changing the script to align with the brand's message and provide supportive product integration. So that means that you are really talking to the brand about certain elements in your script that you are willing to change in order to support the alignment between the brand and your content. The producer integrates the brand in a way that is acceptable to the network and meets the network standards and practices. So many networks have certain rules and regulations of what they allow for you to do and how you integrate the brand. So you really need to make sure that you talk to them first and say, here's what I'm trying to do with the brand. Is it going to be okay with you, or am I upsetting any kind of practice and standards for you, meaning the network? Cross-promotion to market the brand and the show can be optimized to attract eyeballs for both the show and the brand. I mean, we know and we have seen how McDonald's obviously, or how McDonald's has done these kids meals, and then they, include these Marvel toys. So now McDonald's is supporting this certain Marvel movie that's coming out. The same would apply with you. You can align your movie release with the brand, how they are advertising that certain product that is in your movie. This is basically free advertising for you, and it's super helpful because it creates a buzz and an awareness for your movie that you wouldn't have otherwise, or you would have to pay a lot of money to generate. So this is a mutually beneficial thing. If the brand sales numbers can and will increase, obviously that's a plus. You have to think about the brand's reasoning, why they're working with you, why are they putting the product on screen with you and integrated with you organically. Well, obviously they want to increase sales. That's the goal. What do we refer to when we talk about branded content? It's a little bit like what we just talked about in regards to the requirements the brands would want the producer to fulfill in order to include their brand. So branded content is really something that is created in correlation and in in an understanding that you have with the brand. What you want to be careful about, though, is that the piece of content is not ending up being a 90-minute commercial for the brand, or a TV series that is half an hour commercial of the brand. So you really want to hit the balance between what the brand wants you to do and the integration of the content and the entertainment factor of the piece of content that you're creating. Your goal as the producer is to entertain. Your goal is to have a show that looks like a show and not like a commercial. So many brands will try to push, obviously, their their brand in the show, but they also have to understand that by pushing you too much and including the brand in a certain way, they're also making it look like a commercial, which is not good for them and it's not good for you. But the brand doesn't always immediately recognize this, so it's your job to really make them understand, listen guys, it is optimal for you and optimal for me if both our goal is to create a piece of content that is entertaining. So again, here as a producer, you want to let them know what US distribution deal you have secured, because the brand is going to have a very hard time getting you any money if they don't know where the content is being seen. Again, we talked about the show concept, meeting the brand requirement in regards to the overall message and the product integration into the story. We want to make sure the product and the stories are aligned and that there is a balance between entertainment and product integration. The show needs to be really high quality, entertaining, and does not look like a commercial for a brand. So as I mentioned earlier, we don't want this to be a commercial, but we also want to make sure that this show is produced in a very top-notch production quality. It's not like some cheap piece of content that is produced by a producer putting it on its credit card for $10,000. So it really needs to be a top-notch network quality or theatrical quality of production that's applicable here, that really has a high production value. We talked about the cross promotion to the market, which means that you are combining cross promotion with the brand, and you can show an optimized and optimal marketing campaign to attract eyeballs for both the show and the brand. And in the end, again, the goal here for the branded content to be created is that the brand in the end will increase the sales of that piece of product that they are integrating with you. Let's take a look at music investments. What is that? I use music investments when I want to cover a certain budget line item that's associated with music editing, scoring, and so forth. And sometimes I work with music investment companies like Cutting Edge, for example, who give me a certain amount of money, which they then recoup from music royalty rights that they can use when they buy certain publishing rights for the music that is being used in my movie or my TV show. So this is primarily original scoring and original songs that I'm producing for the piece of content that I'm creating. So music investments can be used to cover the budget line items associated with the music budget. It is provided for film and television shows that are commercial and that have a strong global reach. Music investments do not require any creative input or approval for the music used in the film or the TV show. Music investors prefer film and TV shows that provide a significant screen time for the original scoring and songs. And music investors acquire music publishing rights and recoup from music royalties in connection with the publishing rights. So they manage the admin and cue sheets with the music royalty companies like BMI, ASCAP, GEMA, etc. So music investors really want to review the sales estimates, a sales agent, to see, okay, is this show or this film actually aimed for the global market? Is it ideally being sold internationally, not just in the US? Because that is how they're making their money. They're making their money if the show actually is going to be distributed globally. So it's very important for them to look at sales estimates, to look at the global viability of the piece of content that they are investing into. They will not dictate to you what composer you need to choose or what music supervisor you need to choose. They will leave that up to you. They just want to make sure that it's someone that has some experience and that is someone that they can work with, because the music supervisor is obviously important because they provide the music cue sheets, which then are used to administer those music rights. So the creative decision making is entirely up to you and to the director. You don't have to worry about that. This concludes our summary for this week's module Free Money. And again, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Send me a message on the Canvas inbox. And if you would like to set up a one-on-one to talk about either the module content or a project that you might be working on that you need help with, or anything else that I can help you with, just set up a one-on-one on the Canvas calendar where you can pick a slot, or just send me an email if there is no slot available anymore, and we'll set something that works for both of us.